The wind hit Olivia Walsh like a fist the moment she stepped down from the stagecoach, and she knew with a sinking certainty that the driver had been lying when he said the weather would hold. The sky over the Montana Territory stretched gray and swollen, pregnant with snow that would fall hard and fast, and the temperature had dropped so sharply in the last hour that her breath came out in clouds thick enough to cut. She pulled her wool traveling cloak tighter around her shoulders and looked at the other passengers, a cattle buyer from Billings and an elderly woman traveling to visit her son, both of them already hurrying toward the stage station with their heads down against the wind. "Miss, you had better come inside," the driver called down from his seat, but Olivia shook her head. She had paid good money to reach Red Cloud, Nebraska by the end of the week, where a teaching position waited, her first real post after 2 years of working as a governess in Denver. The stage was supposed to continue north within the hour, and she would not miss it because of a little wind. "How long until we leave?" she asked, raising her voice to be heard over the gusts that tore at her skirts. The driver glanced at the horizon and spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "We are not going anywhere, miss. Not today. Storm is coming in mean and we will be lucky to make it back to town before it hits. But I have to reach Red Cloud by Friday. The school board is expecting me." "The school board can wait. Dead teachers are no good to anyone." He climbed down from the box and began unhitching the horses with quick, efficient movements that told Olivia he was genuinely frightened. She had grown up in Boston, where winter meant snow shoveled into tidy piles along the cobblestones and sleigh bells ringing through the common, not this vast howling emptiness that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. The Montana high country was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, all rolling grassland and distant mountains, but it was also brutal in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Where is the nearest town?" she asked, hating the threat of panic in her voice. 15 miles back the way we came. We will never make it." The driver looked past her, squinting into the distance. "There is a ranch about 2 miles north. Big spread, runs cattle. If we ride hard, we can reach it before the snow starts." Olivia turned to look where he was pointing and saw nothing but empty prairie and a line of cottonwoods that might have marked a creek. 2 miles on horseback. You have a better idea." The driver was already saddling one of the stage horses, moving with the kind of speed that made her stomach twist with fear. The wind was picking up, screaming now across the open ground, and the first flakes of snow were beginning to fall, fat and wet, and coming down faster with every breath. She made her decision. "I will ride with you." They left 5 minutes later, Olivia mounted behind the driver on a big bay gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist and her face pressed against his back to shield it from the wind. The cattle buyer and the elderly woman had taken the other 2 horses and were already vanishing into the swirling white ahead of them. The snow was falling in earnest now, thick curtains of it that turned the world into a blank page, and Olivia could feel the cold seeping through her cloak and dress and chemise, settling deep into her bones. She had never been so cold in her life. Her hands were numb inside her gloves, and her feet felt like blocks of ice in her buttoned boots, and she thought with a strange detached clarity that if they did not reach the ranch soon, she was going to freeze to death on the back of a horse in the middle of Montana. The driver pulled the horse to a stop so suddenly that Olivia nearly fell off. "There," he shouted over the wind, pointing at a dark shape barely visible through the snow. It was a barn, a big sturdy structure built from rough-hewn logs, and next to it a ranch house with smoke rising from the chimney. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she felt dizzy with it. The driver urged the horse forward, and they crossed the last 100 yards at a stumbling trot, the wind shoving at them like something alive and angry. A man came out of the house as they rode into the yard, tall and broad-shouldered in a sheepskin coat, a hat pulled low over his face. "Get inside," he called, his voice deep and carrying easily over the storm. "I will take care of the horses." Olivia slid down from the saddle and nearly fell, her legs refusing to hold her after the brutal ride. The man caught her elbow, steadying her, and she had a confused impression of gray eyes and a face that might have been handsome under different circumstances before he was steering her toward the house, one hand firm on her arm. "Can you walk?" "Yes." Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, and she cleared her throat, trying again. "Yes, I can walk." He got her inside and deposited her next to the fireplace, where a cast-iron stove radiated blessed heat. The house was a single large room, neatly kept, with a bed in one corner and a table and chairs in another, and shelves lined with books along one wall. The driver came in behind them, stamping snow from his boots, and the elderly woman was already sitting at the table with a cup of something hot between her hands, her face gray with exhaustion. "Is everyone accounted for?" the rancher asked, and the driver nodded. The cattle buyer rode for his own place, said it was not far. "Just the three of us came here. Smart. That storm is going to be a killer." The rancher moved to the stove and poured coffee from a battered pot, pressing a cup into Olivia's hands. She wrapped her fingers around it and felt the warmth seeping into her skin, painful and wonderful all at once. "Drink that. You need to get warm before the cold settles in too deep." She drank, and the coffee was strong enough to make her gasp, bitter and hot and exactly what she needed. The rancher was doing the same for the driver, efficient and calm, and Olivia found herself studying him with the part of her mind that was not occupied with simply surviving. He was younger than she had first thought, probably close to her own age of 23, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and a face that was more interesting than handsome, all strong bones and a mouth that looked like it smiled often. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, and there was something about him that made her feel immediately safer, as though he was the kind of man who could handle whatever the world threw at him. "How long will the storm last?" the driver asked, and the rancher shrugged. "Could be a day, could be a week. We have been getting hit hard this winter, lost a lot of cattle already, and it is only January." He glanced at Olivia, his gray eyes sharp and assessing. "You were traveling to Red Cloud?" "Yes." "I have a teaching position there. You are going to miss it. No one is going anywhere until this blows over." He said it matter-of-factly, without any apparent awareness of how completely those words upended her life. The school board would give the position to someone else. She would have to return to Denver and start over, looking for another post, another chance to build the independent life she had fought so hard for after her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a reputation as an educated woman, which was sometimes worse than useless. "I understand," she said, because there was nothing else to say. The rancher smiled at her, a quick, warm expression that transformed his face. "Do not look so worried. We will get you to Red Cloud once the weather clears. If you are late, you are late. They will understand. Everyone knows what this winter has been like. You are very kind." She meant it. He did not have to take them in, could have turned them away to take their chances with the storm, and instead he was offering her coffee and reassurance as though she was a guest who had arrived under normal circumstances. "My name is Henry Everett," he said. "This is my ranch, or what is left of it. Welcome to Montana. Olivia Walsh." She set down the coffee cup and extended her hand, and he shook it gravely, his grip warm and strong. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Everett. Call me Henry." We are going to be snowed in together for a while. Might as well dispense with the formalities." He turned to the driver and the elderly woman. "There is food in the larder and plenty of firewood. Make yourselves comfortable. I need to check on the livestock and make sure everything is battened down before this gets worse." He was gone before Olivia could ask how it could possibly get worse, pulling his coat tight and disappearing out into the howling white. The driver settled into a chair with a sigh, and the elderly woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson, began fussing with the stove, putting on a pot of something that smelled like beans and salt pork. Olivia stood by the fire and watched the snow pile up against the windows, thick and fast, and tried not to think about everything she was losing with every hour that passed. Henry came back in after what felt like an eternity, covered in snow from head to foot, ice crusting his eyebrows and mustache. He shook himself like a dog and grinned at their startled expressions. "It is bad out there," he said cheerfully. "Real bad. We are going to be here a while." He was right. The storm raged for 3 days without stopping, the wind shrieking around the house like a living thing and the snow piling up in drifts as high as the windows. Henry moved between the house and the barn, checking on his remaining cattle and horses, while the rest of them stayed inside and tried to stay warm. The house was crowded with 4 people in it, especially at night, and on the first evening Henry had insisted that Olivia take his bed while he and the driver slept in the barn. "Absolutely not," Olivia had said, appalled at the idea. "I cannot take your bed. You live here. And you are a guest. I have blankets in the hayloft and the animals keep it warm enough. Mrs. Patterson can share the bed with you and the driver and I will be fine out there." He said it in a tone that brooked no argument, already gathering up quilts and a pillow. "Mr. Everett, please. This is your home." He paused in the doorway and looked back at her, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "Miss Walsh, do you know what the temperature is right now? 20 below and dropping. If you stay in the barn, you will freeze to death by morning, and I would rather not have that on my conscience. Take the bed." He left before she could protest further, and Olivia stood there feeling helpless and grateful and deeply aware that she was beholden to a stranger in ways she had never imagined. Mrs. Patterson patted her hand and said, "He is a good man, dear. Let him do this." The days blurred together, time measured by the howling of the wind and the slow consumption of Henry's stores of food and firewood. Olivia helped Mrs. Patterson with the cooking and mending, glad to have something to do with her hands, and tried not to worry about what was happening in Red Cloud. The driver, whose name was Tom, played cards with Henry in the evenings and told stories about his years on the stage routes, some of them funny and some of them harrowing. Henry was a good listener, asking questions and laughing in all the right places, and Olivia found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, and the unconscious grace with which he moved, even in the cramped confines of the house. On the 3rd night, when the storm finally began to ease, Henry came in from the barn and sat down at the table with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. His face was drawn with exhaustion, and there was something in his eyes that made Olivia's chest tighten with sympathy. "Lost another cow," he said quietly. "Found her frozen in the north pasture. That makes 15 head since November." Tom whistled low. "That is a hard winter for sure. The worst I have seen." Henry rubbed a hand over his face. "I started with 200 head. I am down to maybe 50 now, if that. By the time this winter is done, I will be lucky to have a herd at all." Olivia wanted to say something comforting, but could not find the words. She knew nothing about ranching, nothing about the brutal economics of raising cattle in a land that seemed determined to kill everything that lived on it. All she could do was pour him a cup of coffee and set it in front of him, and he looked up at her with a smile that was tired but genuine. "Thank you, Miss Walsh. Olivia," she said, echoing his words from the first day. "We are snowed in together after all." His smile widened. "Olivia, then." The storm broke the next morning, the wind dying away to nothing and the sun coming out hard and bright, turning the snow into a field of blinding white that hurt to look at. Tom hitched up the stage horse and announced his intention to ride back to the station and report what had happened. Mrs. Patterson was ready to go with him, eager to reach her son and reassure him that she was alive. And Olivia knew she should go too, should start making her way back to civilization and trying to salvage something from the wreckage of her plans. But Henry caught her elbow as she was gathering her things, his touch light but insistent. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" Privately, she nodded, confused, and followed him outside into the cold, brilliant morning. The snow came up past her knees, and she had to lift her skirts high to walk, her breath coming out in plumes. Henry led her around to the side of the house, out of sight of the others, and then stopped and turned to face her. "Olivia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." His expression was serious, almost grim, and she felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "All right. You have been here for 3 nights, alone with me, or as good as, given that Tom and Mrs. Patterson spent most of their time in the house while I was in the barn. Do you understand what that means for your reputation?" She stared at him, not comprehending for a moment, and then the full weight of it hit her like a blow. An unmarried woman, trapped alone with a bachelor rancher for nearly a week. It did not matter that there had been a storm, that she had slept in his bed while he froze in the barn, that nothing remotely improper had happened. People would talk. They always did. And once they started talking, no school board in the territory would hire her, no respectable family would take her on as a governess. She would be ruined, as surely as if she actually had done something worth being ruined for. "Oh God," she whispered. "I am sorry." Henry looked genuinely distressed. "I did not think about it until last night. I was too focused on keeping everyone alive. But now I am thinking about what happens when you leave here and what people will say, and I cannot let you face that alone. What are you suggesting?" He took a deep breath and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small object that gleamed gold in the sunlight. A ring, delicate and old-fashioned, with a tiny garnet set in the center. "Marry me," he said. Olivia felt the world tilt sideways. "What, marry me? Right now, before Tom and Mrs. Patterson leave? They can serve as witnesses. We will say we were engaged before the storm, that I sent for you to come out here and marry me, and the blizzard just happened to strand you here on your way to my ranch. It will explain everything and no one will question it. But that is a lie." "Yes." He met her eyes steadily. "It is a lie that will save your reputation and let you keep living the life you want. The alternative is that you go back to Denver with no job and no prospects, and everyone knowing exactly why." She shook her head, trying to make sense of what he was proposing. "You cannot just marry me to save my reputation. That is insane." "Why is it insane?" "I need a wife. Ranch is too big for one person and I am tired of living alone. You need a husband, or at least the appearance of one, so you can hold your head up in public. It is a practical arrangement. We are both adults. We can make it work. You do not even know me. I know enough." He said it with a confidence that should have been irritating but somehow was not. "I know you are brave because you did not panic during the storm. I know you are kind because you have been helping Mrs. Patterson all week without being asked. I know you are smart because I saw the books in your trunk. That is more than a lot of people know about each other when they get married." Olivia looked down at the ring in his palm, the garnet catching the light like a drop of frozen blood. It was beautiful, the kind of thing that had been worn and loved for years, and she wondered whose it had been and why he had it. "Where did you get that?" "It was my mother's. She died when I was 15 and left it to me, said I should give it to the woman I married." His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I know this is not the way she probably imagined it happening, but I think she would have approved. She always said the most important thing in a marriage was kindness, and you have that." She wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him that she had not fought her way out of Boston and across half the country just to end up married to a stranger, trapped on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with no money and no independence. But the truth was that she had no other options. If she refused him, she would be going back to exactly the kind of life she had been trying to escape, dependent on the charity of relatives who resented her, and the occasional pittance she could earn as a seamstress or a companion to some wealthy woman who treated her like a servant. And there was something about Henry Everett that made her want to say yes. Something in the way he had given her his bed and slept in the cold barn without complaint, the way he had looked at her with those steady gray eyes and offered her a solution instead of pity. "If I agree," she said slowly, "what kind of marriage would this be? In name only or something more?" He flushed, color rising in his cheeks. "That would be entirely up to you. I am not going to force anything on you, Olivia. This is about giving you a choice, not taking it away. We can start as friends and see where it goes from there. And if it does not go anywhere, if we find we cannot stand each other, then we will figure something out. I am not a monster. I will not trap you here if you are miserable." He paused, then added quietly, "But I do not think we will be miserable. I think we might actually do all right together, given a chance." She looked at him for a long moment, this stranger who was proposing to append both their lives to save her from a scandal she had done nothing to deserve. He looked hopeful and nervous and painfully young, despite the hard muscles and calloused hands that spoke of years of brutal work. She thought about Red Cloud and the teaching position she would never have, and then she thought about standing here in the snow with the sun on her face, and a man who was kind offering her a different kind of future. "All right," she said. "I will marry you." The look of relief and joy that flooded his face was almost painful to see. He reached for her hand and slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I will do my best to make you happy, Olivia. I swear it." They were married an hour later, standing in Henry's little house with Tom and Mrs. Patterson as witnesses, and a Bible open on the table between them. There was no preacher, but Tom had once been a Methodist circuit rider before he took up the stage routes, and he spoke the words of the service with a gravity that made them feel real and binding. Henry held her hand throughout, his grip warm and steady, and when Tom pronounced them man and wife, he smiled at her with such genuine happiness that Olivia felt something loosen in her chest. Some tight knot of fear she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "You may kiss your bride," Tom said, and Henry leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, soft and brief and somehow perfect. "Mrs. Patterson cried and hugged them both, and Tom shook Henry's hand and told him he was a lucky man, and then they were bundling back into their coats and heading out into the snow, leaving Olivia alone with her new husband in the sudden ringing silence. Henry cleared his throat. "So, I suppose we should talk about sleeping arrangements. You should take your bed back," Olivia said quickly. "I can sleep in the barn now or on the floor here or something." "You are not sleeping on the floor. You are my wife now, which means you get the bed." "I will stay in the barn like I have been." "Henry, that is ridiculous. You cannot keep sleeping in the barn. This is your house." "It is our house now." He said it firmly, meeting her eyes. "And I meant what I said earlier. I am not going to rush you into anything. When you are ready to share a bed, you can let me know. Until then, I am perfectly comfortable in the hayloft." She wanted to argue, but the stubborn set of his jaw told her it would be pointless. "Thank you," she said instead, and he smiled at her, that quick, warm smile that made her stomach do strange, fluttering things. "You are welcome. Now I need to go check on the cattle and see how many made it through the storm. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" "Of course." She was not some fragile flower who needed constant supervision. She had been taking care of herself for years. He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a stray curl behind her ear, his fingers gentle. "I am glad you said yes, Olivia. I think this is going to work out." Then he was gone, pulling on his coat and hat and heading out into the blinding white. And Olivia was left alone in the house that was now hers, wearing a ring that had belonged to a woman she had never met, and married to a man she had known for 4 days. She sat down at the table and looked at her hand, at the way the garnet caught the light from the window. It was madness, all of it, but it was also, she thought, possibly the sanest thing she had ever done. The next few days settled into a pattern. Henry was up before dawn, to feed the animals and check the fences and do the 1,000 other tasks that kept a ranch running, even a ranch as diminished as his had become. Olivia cooked and cleaned and tried to make the house feel like a home. Hanging curtains she sewed from flour sacks, and organizing the shelves of supplies with a precision that made Henry laugh when he came in for supper. They ate together at the table, talking about small things, the weather and the state of the herd and the books on his shelves, which turned out to be an eclectic collection ranging from agricultural manuals to the poetry of Tennyson. "My mother loved to read," he said when Olivia asked about them. "She insisted I learn, even though my father thought it was a waste of time for a rancher. Said a man who could not read was a man who could be cheated, and she was right. I have read every contract and bill of sale that has come through this place because of her." "She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." His voice was soft with memory. "She died of pneumonia the winter I turned 15. My father went 2 years later, thrown from a horse and broke his neck. So it has just been me here since I was 17, trying to keep this place running and mostly failing." "You are not failing," Olivia said, surprised by the vehemence in her own voice. "You have kept this ranch going through a winter that would have broken most people. That is not failure." He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You have a lot of faith in me, considering you barely know me." "I know enough." She echoed his words back to him deliberately and was rewarded with a grin. "Touché." The weather stayed cold but clear, and Henry spent long hours out on the range, riding through the snow to check on his remaining cattle and bring them closer to the barn where he could feed them from his dwindling stores of hay. Olivia watched him ride out each morning and tried not to worry, but she could see the strain on his face when he came back, the way his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He was pushing himself too hard, she thought, trying to save a herd that was already mostly gone, but she did not know how to tell him to stop without sounding like she was criticizing him. On the 10th day of their marriage, he came back at sunset and found her standing in the doorway of the barn, holding a lantern and watching the sky turn violet and gold over the mountains. He swung down from his horse and walked over to her, moving stiffly, and she saw that his face was gray with cold. "You should come inside," she said. "You look frozen." "I am all right." But he swayed as he said it, and she dropped the lantern and caught his arm, steadying him. "You are not all right. Come on." She led him into the house and sat him down by the stove, pulling off his coat and hat and gloves with hands that shook slightly. His skin was icy to the touch, and his lips had a faint blue tinge, and she felt a surge of anger at him for being so careless with himself. "I am fine, Olivia. Just cold." You are half frozen and exhausted, which is not the same as fine." She poured hot coffee and pressed the cup into his hands, then knelt down and started unlacing his boots. He made a sound of protest, but she ignored him, yanking the boots off and wincing at how cold his feet were even through the wool socks. "You do not have to do this," he said, sounding embarrassed. "Yes, I do. You are my husband and you are going to make yourself sick if you keep going like this." She stood up and fetched a quilt from the bed, wrapping it around his shoulders. "When was the last time you ate a real meal?" "This morning. Liar. You had coffee and a piece of bread and then you were gone before I could make you anything else." She ladled stew from the pot on the stove and set it in front of him, along with a thick slab of bread. "Eat." He ate, too tired to argue, and she watched him with a mixture of exasperation and something softer, something that felt dangerously like affection. He had been running himself into the ground trying to save his ranch, and she understood the impulse, the stubborn refusal to admit defeat, but she also knew he could not keep going like this. When he was done eating, she poured him more coffee and sat down across from him at the table. "Henry, you need to rest." "I know, I will, after I check the cattle tomorrow." "No, you need to rest now, today, tomorrow. Give yourself a break before you collapse." He shook his head. "I cannot afford to take a break. Every day I lose more cattle, and if I do not keep moving I will lose everything." "You are going to lose everything anyway if you kill yourself." She said it bluntly and saw him flinch. "I am sorry, but it is true. You cannot save the herd all by yourself, and you are going to destroy yourself trying." "What else am I supposed to do?" There was raw frustration in his voice and something close to despair. "This ranch is all I have. It is all I have ever had. If I lose it, I lose everything my parents worked for, everything they built. I cannot just give up." Olivia reached across the table and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I am not asking you to give up. I am asking you to be smart. Rest for a day. Let yourself recover. And then we will figure out a plan together. You are not alone anymore, Henry. You have me." He looked down at their joined hands, and when he raised his eyes to hers they were bright with unshed tears. "I do not deserve you," he said quietly. "Do not be ridiculous. You gave me your bed and your name and your mother's ring. I would say that makes us even." She squeezed his hand gently. "Please, Henry, rest. For me, if not for yourself," he nodded slowly. "All right, one day, but then I have to get back to work. One day is all I am asking." He spent the next day in the house, sleeping late, and then sitting by the fire with a book, looking restless and unhappy, but at least warm and fed. Olivia made bread and stew and cornbread, using up their stores of flour and cornmeal with a reckless extravagance that would have horrified her frugal Boston relatives, and she did not care. Henry needed to eat, needed to build his strength back up, and she was going to make sure he did. In the evening, when the light was fading and the temperature dropping again, he came up behind her where she stood at the window looking out at the snow. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for making me rest. I needed it. You are welcome." She did not turn around, too aware of how close he was standing, the warmth of his body radiating through the thin fabric of her dress. "Olivia, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you regret marrying me?" The question caught her off guard, and she did turn then, finding him standing just inches away with an expression on his face that was painfully vulnerable. "No," she said, and meant it. "I do not regret it. Why would you think I do? Because this is not what you wanted. You wanted to be a teacher, to be independent, and instead you are stuck here with me in the middle of nowhere, watching my ranch fall apart around us." She reached up and touched his face, her palm resting against his cheek. "I am not stuck. I chose this, remember? I could have said no. I could have taken my chances with the scandal and gone back to Denver. But I did not, because I thought this might be better, and it is. Even with everything falling apart, even with that, she smiled at him. You are a good man, Henry Everett. I am glad I married you. He covered her hand with his, holding it against his face. I am glad you married me too. I know it has not been long, but I cannot imagine this place without you anymore. You make it feel like a home again. It is a home, she said softly. Our home. He leaned down and kissed her, slow and sweet and thorough, and she felt herself melting into him, her arms coming up to circle his neck. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and there was a question in his eyes that she answered by taking his hand and leading him toward the bed. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough. I am sure. They made love by the light of the fire, tender and unhurried, and afterward Olivia lay in his arms and listened to his heartbeat, and felt more at peace than she had in years. This was not the life she had planned, but it was a good life, and she was realizing with every passing day that she was falling in love with the man who had given her his name and his ring and his bed. The thaw came in early March, sudden and brutal, the snow melting so fast that the creeks flooded and the roads turned to rivers of mud. Henry rode out to survey his herd and came back with a face like stone, and Olivia knew before he said anything that it was bad. I have 30 head left, he said flatly, standing in the doorway with mud up to his knees. Out of 200, 30. She crossed to him and put her arms around him, holding him tight. I am so sorry. It is not enough. 30 head will not pay the bank, will not buy the supplies we need to get through next winter. I am ruined, Olivia. The ranch is finished. No, she pulled back and looked at him fiercely. It is not finished. We have 30 head, which is 30 more than some people have. We have this house and the barn and each other. We will find a way to make it work. How? There is not enough money to keep this place running. I am going to lose it. Then we start smaller. We sell some of the land, keep just enough for the cattle we have. You find work in town, or I do. We do whatever it takes. She gripped his shoulders. We do not give up, Henry, not after everything we have been through. He looked at her for a long moment, and then something shifted in his face, the despair giving way to something harder and more determined. You really think we can do this? I know we can. He kissed her, hard and desperate, and she kissed him back with all the love and certainty she had. They would survive this. They would find a way. They had each other, and that was enough. The next weeks were brutal. Henry sold off half the ranch land to a neighbor who had weathered the winter better, and used the money to pay down his debt to the bank and buy supplies for the coming year. Olivia took in sewing and laundry from the few families that lived within riding distance, working by candlelight long after Henry had gone to bed, and slowly they began to build up a small reserve of cash. It was not much, but it was something, a fragile safety net that kept them from falling into complete destitution. Henry threw himself into rebuilding the herd, trading work with other ranchers for breeding stock, and nursing the surviving cattle back to health after the hard winter. He was up before dawn and out until after dark most days, and Olivia worried about him, but there was a new energy in him now, a sense of purpose that had been missing before. He was fighting for something he believed in, something that belonged to both of them, and it gave him strength. In June, Olivia realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and queasy for weeks, and when she finally allowed herself to consider the possibility, it seemed so obvious she could not believe she had not realized sooner. She told Henry that night over supper, setting down her fork and saying simply, I am going to have a baby. He stared at her, his mouth falling open in shock, and then a grin spread across his face so wide and joyful that she started laughing. Are you sure? He asked, and she nodded. As sure as I can be. I think it will be sometime in January. He was out of his chair and around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and kissing her soundly. "That is the best news I have had all year, all my life maybe. You are happy." She had been nervous about telling him, worried that a baby would be one more mouth to feed when they were already struggling. "Happy. Olivia, I am over the moon. We are going to have a baby. A family." He held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I love you. I should have said it before, but I am saying it now. I love you. I love you too." The words came easily, naturally, because they were true. She loved this man, this stubborn, kind, impossible rancher who had given her everything and asked for nothing in return. They spent the summer building a life together, working side by side to bring the ranch back from the edge of ruin. It was hard, grinding work, but there was also joy in it, in the simple satisfaction of watching the cattle grow fat on summer grass, and the garden Olivia planted bloom with tomatoes and beans and squash. They had neighbors over for supper sometimes, people who had also lost everything in the winter and were trying to rebuild, and there was a sense of community in it, a shared understanding that they were all in this together. In the fall, Henry finished building a cradle, a beautiful thing carved from cottonwood with rockers that moved smooth and silent. He presented it to Olivia one evening with a shy pride, setting it beside the bed, and she ran her hands over the smooth wood and tried not to cry. "It is perfect," she said. "Thank you. I wanted to give the baby something special, something that will last." He crouched down beside her and put a hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of movement beneath his palm. "I cannot wait to meet this little one. Neither can I." Winter came again, but this time they were prepared. Henry had laid in stores of hay and feed for the cattle, and Olivia had canned vegetables and fruit until the shelves in the larder were lined with jars of green beans and tomatoes and peaches. They settled into the house as the snow began to fall, cozy and warm, and waited for the baby to come. Their son was born on a bitter cold night in late January, 2 years almost to the day after the blizzard that had brought Olivia to the ranch. Henry delivered him with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, and when he laid the baby in Olivia's arms, she looked down at the tiny red face and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost frightening. "What should we name him?" Henry asked, his voice hoarse. She thought about everything they had been through, the storm and the marriage and the long, hard months of rebuilding, and she thought about the future stretching out ahead of them, full of possibility. "Wesley," she said, "after your father." Henry's face crumpled and he leaned down to kiss her forehead, then the baby's. "Wesley. That is perfect." They raised Wesley in the house that Henry's parents had built, surrounded by the mountains and the prairie and the endless sky. The ranch grew slowly, year by year, as they saved money and bought more cattle and hired hands to help with the work. It was never as grand as it had been before the winter of 1887, but it was theirs, built from the ground up with their own sweat and determination, and that made it more precious than any amount of wealth. When Wesley was 2, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Penelope, a fierce little thing with her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. 2 years after that came another daughter, Pearl, quieter but just as strong. The house was filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of children, and Henry and Olivia thrived in it, their love for each other deepening with every passing year. On a spring evening when Wesley was 5, and the girls were toddling around getting into everything, Henry and Olivia sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Wesley was playing in the yard with a stick he was pretending was a horse, and Penelope and Pearl were napping inside, worn out from a day of following their brother everywhere. You ever think about what would have happened if that storm had not trapped you here? Henry asked, reaching over to take Olivia's hand. She threaded her fingers through his and smiled. Sometimes, but not often, I like the life we have too much to wish for a different one. Even though it is not what you planned, especially because it is not what I planned. She turned to look at him, this man who had given her his bed and his ring and his heart. I was trying so hard to be independent, to prove I did not need anyone, and then I met you, and I realized that needing someone is not weakness, it is just being human. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, his lips warm against her skin. I thank God every day for that blizzard, for bringing you here, for giving me a second chance at life. We gave each other a second chance, she said, and we made the most of it. They sat together as the light faded and the stars came out, one by one, hard and bright against the darkening sky. Wesley ran over and climbed into Henry's lap, sticky and sweaty and chattering about the horse he was going to have when he was bigger. And Henry listened with the same careful attention he gave to everything, his arms around his son and his wife beside him. Inside, the girls woke and began calling for their mother, and Olivia stood with a laugh, dropping a kiss on Henry's head as she went past. "Duty calls. I will be in soon." She paused in the doorway and looked back at them, her husband and her son silhouetted against the last light, and felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it took her breath away. This was her life, her family, her home, and she would not trade it for anything in the world. The years rolled on, marked by the turning of the seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Wesley grew tall and strong, learning to rope and ride almost before he could walk, and the girls followed him like ducklings, Penelope bold and Pearl thoughtful. The ranch prospered, slowly but steadily, and Henry and Olivia saved enough to buy back some of the land Henry had sold, reclaiming piece by piece what had been lost in that terrible winter. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Henry still rose before dawn to tend the cattle, and Olivia still took in sewing when they needed extra money, but there was a contentment in their lives that made the hard work feel worthwhile. They had built something together, something that would last long after they were gone, and that was a kind of wealth no bank could measure. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Henry gave Olivia a locket with pictures of their 3 children inside, and she gave him a new saddle she had saved for months to buy. They did not have a party or go into town for a fancy dinner, but they sat together on the porch after the children were asleep and watched the stars and talked about everything and nothing, the way they had done for 10 years. "You remember the first night we were alone here?" Henry asked. After Tom and Mrs. Patterson left, Olivia laughed. "I remember thinking you were completely insane for proposing to me. I was terrified you would say no. I was terrified I would say yes." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Best decision I ever made, though. Best decision I ever made was asking." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Olivia Everett. I love you too." The children grew and the ranch grew with them. Wesley showed an aptitude for the business side of ranching that impressed his father, keeping careful records of expenses and income, and negotiating with buyers in town with a confidence beyond his years. Penelope was a natural horsewoman, fearless and graceful in the saddle, and Pearl had her mother's gift for making a house a home, always bringing in wildflowers or baking bread that made the whole place smell like heaven. When Wesley turned 18, Henry signed over half the ranch to him, making him a partner in the business. It was earlier than most fathers would have done it, but Henry trusted his son, and he wanted Wesley to have a stake in the future they were building together. Wesley took the responsibility seriously, working even harder than before, and Olivia watched the two of them together and felt a pride so fierce it made her chest ache. Penelope married a neighboring rancher's son when she was 20, a good man who treated her with the respect she deserved. And Pearl surprised everyone by announcing that she wanted to be a teacher. Olivia helped her study for the examination, drilling her on history and mathematics and literature. And when Pearl passed and got a post at the school in Red Cloud, the same school Olivia had been traveling to all those years ago, Olivia cried with joy and pride. "You are living the life I thought I wanted," she told Pearl the night before she left for Red Cloud. "And I am so happy for you." "I learned from you, Mama," Pearl said, hugging her tight. "You showed me that a woman can be anything she wants to be, even a rancher's wife and a mother." Olivia held her daughter and thought about the girl she had been, desperate for independence and terrified of being trapped, and she marveled at how much had changed. She had found her independence, not in spite of her marriage but because of it, because Henry had never tried to make her into something she was not. He had given her the space to grow and the support to thrive, and she had done the same for him. And together, they had built a life that was more than either of them could have managed alone. As they grew older, Henry's hair turned silver and Olivia's face lined with the marks of decades of sun and wind and hard work. But they were still as in love as they had been the day he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger in the snow. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still reached for each other in the night, still found joy in the simple fact of being together. When Henry turned 50, Wesley threw a party at the ranch, inviting every neighbor and friend within 50 miles. The house was packed with people, and there was music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat, and Henry stood in the middle of it all looking dazed and happy. Olivia found him on the porch late in the evening, taking a break from the noise, and she slipped her hand into his. "Having fun?" she asked. "Best night of my life." "Well, second best. First best was the night we got married," she laughed. "We got married in the morning. Then the morning we got married, you know what I mean." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I have been thinking a lot lately about that winter, about how close I came to losing everything, and how instead I ended up with more than I ever dreamed of." "We were lucky," Olivia said. "We were. But it was more than luck. It was you, Olivia. You saved me. You saved this place. You gave me a reason to keep fighting when I wanted to give up." "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "That is what marriage is, Henry, saving each other over and over again." He kissed her, long and slow and sweet, and when they broke apart they were both smiling. Inside, someone called for them to come back and join the dancing, and they went, hand in hand, into the warmth and light and noise of their life. The ranch passed to Wesley when Henry and Olivia finally retired, moving into a smaller house on the property that Wesley built for them with his own hands. They spent their days gardening and reading and spoiling their grandchildren, of which there were eventually 7, a noisy, joyful horde that descended on the ranch every Sunday for dinner. Olivia cooked and Henry told stories, and the grandchildren listened with wide eyes to tales of the winter of 1887 and the blizzard that had brought their grandparents together. "Is it true Grandma was going to be a teacher?" one of them asked, and Olivia smiled. "It is true. I was supposed to teach at the school in Red Cloud. But you did not. No, I married your grandfather instead. Do you wish you had been a teacher?" Olivia looked at Henry, who was watching her with those same steady gray eyes that had captured her heart more than 40 years ago, and she shook her head. "Not for a single moment. I had a different kind of life, and it was exactly the one I needed." When Henry died at 72, peacefully in his sleep, Olivia felt as though a part of her had been torn away. She sat at his grave and held the ring he had given her all those years ago, the garnet worn smooth with decades of wear, and she cried for the man who had given her everything and asked for nothing in return. But she did not stay sad for long. Henry would not have wanted that. She filled her days with her children and grandchildren, with the ranch that was still running strong thanks to Wesley's careful management, with the life they had built together. And on clear nights, she would sit on the porch of the little house and look up at the stars and talk to Henry, telling him about the children and the ranch, and how much she missed him. She lived another 8 years, long enough to see Wesley's son take over the ranch and continue the legacy they had started. And when she died, at 80 years old, surrounded by family and love to the very end, she was buried next to Henry on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so big and blue it seemed to go on forever. Their story became part of the family lore, told and retold by generations of children who grew up on the ranch Henry and Olivia had saved. The blizzard that trapped her at his hayloft, the way he gave her his bed and slept in the cold, the ring that had belonged to his mother, the marriage that started as a solution to a scandal and became the greatest love story any of them had ever known. And if you go to Montana even now, more than a century later, you can still find the ranch, still thriving, still run by the descendants of Henry Everett and Olivia Walsh. The house has been rebuilt and the barn modernized, but the land is the same, rolling and beautiful under that endless sky. And if you listen carefully on a winter night, when the wind howls down from the mountains and the snow falls thick and fast, you might hear the echo of their story, a reminder that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings, and that love, when it is true, can weather anything. But the story really begins in the days and weeks and months between that first desperate marriage proposal in the snow and the moment they realized they had fallen truly, irrevocably in love. Those were the days that built the foundation of everything that came after, and they were filled with moments both tender and difficult, with misunderstandings and revelations, with the slow, careful dance of two strangers learning to become partners. The morning after their wedding night, Olivia woke alone in Henry's bed and lay there for a moment trying to reconcile her new reality. She was married, to a man she had known for less than 2 weeks. A man who was currently sleeping in a hayloft because he had given her his bed and refused to take it back even though they were husband and wife now. The whole situation was absurd, and yet when she thought about the alternative, about going back to Denver as a ruined woman with no prospects, she knew she had made the right choice. She got up and dressed, braiding her hair and pinning it up, and set about making breakfast. There was bacon in the larder and eggs from the chickens Henry kept in a coop behind the barn, and she fried them both and made coffee and set the table the way her mother had taught her years ago, before her father's gambling debts had destroyed their comfortable Boston life. When Henry came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots, he stopped in the doorway and stared at the table as though he had never seen food before. "You did not have to do all this," he said. "I know, but we both have to eat and I am a decent cook. It seemed practical." She poured him coffee and sat down across from him, suddenly nervous. This was the first morning of their married life, and she had no idea what the rules were supposed to be, what he expected from her. He ate with the focused intensity of someone who had been working hard on an empty stomach, and when he was done, he sat back and looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "That was the best breakfast I have had in years. It was just bacon and eggs. It was more than that. It was someone caring enough to make it for me." He said it simply, without any self-pity, but Olivia felt her heart squeeze with sympathy for this man who had been living alone for so long. "Well, you will have to get used to it. I intend to feed you properly from now on." He smiled, that warm, quick smile that transformed his whole face. "I can live with that. They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Henry worked outside from dawn to dusk, fighting to keep his remaining cattle alive through the brutal cold, and Olivia worked inside, cooking and cleaning and mending and learning the rhythms of ranch life. It was harder than anything she had done before, the work never ending and the isolation sometimes overwhelming, but there was also something deeply satisfying about it. She was building something real here, something that belonged to her and Henry both, and that mattered in ways she had not anticipated. They talked over meals, sharing stories about their childhoods and their families and their hopes for the future. Olivia learned that Henry had wanted to be a veterinarian when he was young, but his father's death had forced him to take over the ranch before he could pursue any kind of formal education. Henry learned that Olivia had taught herself Latin and Greek from her father's books, reading by candlelight after he had drunk himself into a stupor, and she could be sure he would not bother her. "You would have made a wonderful teacher," Henry said one evening, and Olivia felt a pang of loss for the life she had given up. "Maybe, but I think I might make a decent rancher's wife instead, given time." "You already are a decent rancher's wife. More than decent." "You are keeping me sane, Olivia. I do not think you realize how much that means." She reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You are keeping me sane too, but there were difficult moments as well. Moments when the walls of the small house seemed to close in on her, and she missed the busy streets of Denver, the noise and activity and sense of being part of something larger. Moments when she caught Henry watching her with a sadness in his eyes that made her wonder if he regretted marrying her, if he wished he had found someone who was better suited to this hard, lonely life. One particularly bad day in late February, when the wind had been howling for 3 days straight and the temperature had dropped so low that the water in the bucket by the door froze solid, Olivia snapped at Henry over something trivial, some small mess he had made that she had to clean up, and he snapped back. It was their first real argument, both of them tired and stressed and taking it out on each other, and it escalated quickly into something ugly. "Maybe this was a mistake," Olivia said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Maybe we should have never gotten married. Maybe I should have just taken my chances with the scandal." Henry went very still, his face draining of color. "Do you mean that?" She wanted to say no, wanted to take it back, but the fear and frustration of the past weeks came pouring out instead. "I do not know. I do not know what I mean anymore. I just know that I am tired and cold and stuck here with nowhere to go and nothing to do but cook and clean and watch you work yourself to death trying to save a herd that is already gone. Then leave." His voice was flat, emotionless. "The roads are still bad, but if you really want to go, I will take you to town tomorrow. You can get the stage back to Denver and we can pretend this never happened." "Is that what you want?" "What I want does not matter. You are the one who says this is a mistake." They stared at each other across the small room, both of them breathing hard, and Olivia felt tears burning behind her eyes. She did not want to leave. That was the truth she had been avoiding, the realization that had been creeping up on her for weeks. She did not want to leave this house or this ranch or this man, even though it was hard, even though she was scared and lonely and overwhelmed. She wanted to stay and fight and build something here, but she did not know how to say it without sounding weak or desperate. "I do not want to leave," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am sorry. I did not mean what I said. I am just frightened." The tension went out of Henry's shoulders and he crossed to her in 3 quick strides, pulling her into his arms. "I am frightened too," he said against her hair. "I am terrified that you are going to wake up one day and realize you made a terrible mistake, that you are going to hate me for trapping you here. But I do not want you to go, Olivia. I want you to stay. I need you to stay." She held him tight, her face pressed against his chest, and let herself cry for the first time since the wedding. She cried for the life she had given up, and the uncertainty of the life she had chosen, for the loneliness and the fear and the bone-deep exhaustion of trying to be strong all the time. And Henry held her through it all, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances, and when she was finally done, he tilted her face up and kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "We are going to be all right," he said. "I promise. It is hard now, but it will get easier. We just have to hold on. I know. I am sorry I doubted us. Do not be sorry. We are both learning as we go. That is what marriage is, I think. Just two people stumbling forward together and hoping they do not fall." After that, they were more careful with each other, more aware of the strain they were both under. Henry made an effort to come in earlier in the evenings, to spend time with Olivia instead of working until he could barely stand. Olivia made an effort to be patient with the messes and the chaos of ranch life, to remember that they were in this together. And slowly, gradually, the distance between them began to close. One evening in early March, a few days before the thaw began, Henry came in from the barn carrying a small wooden box. He set it on the table in front of Olivia and stepped back, looking nervous. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." She lifted the lid and found a harmonica inside, old and well-worn, the metal tarnished with age. "Henry, I do not know how to play." "I know. But I do. I thought maybe I could teach you. My mother used to play, and she taught me when I was little. I have not touched it since she died, but I thought maybe it was time." He picked up the harmonica and turned it over in his hands, his expression distant with memory. "She used to play in the evenings after dinner. My father would sit and listen, and sometimes he would sing along, even though he could not carry a tune to save his life. It made the house feel happy, you know, like a home." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes at the image. "I would love to learn." So he taught her, sitting beside her at the table and showing her how to hold the instrument, how to breathe through it to make the notes sound clear and true. She was terrible at first, producing more squeaks than music, but Henry was patient and encouraging, and by the end of the evening she could play a simple melody that made him grin with pride. "See, you are a natural. I am terrible and you know it. You are learning. That is what matters." He took the harmonica from her and played a few bars of a song she did not recognize, something slow and sweet that made her think of summer evenings and fireflies. "My mother used to play this one all the time. It was my father's favorite. It is beautiful. What is it called?" "I do not know if it has a name. She just called it the song that made your father smile." He set the harmonica down and looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "I want to make you smile, Olivia. I want to make you happy here. Tell me how." She thought about it, about what she needed to feel less isolated and overwhelmed. "Teach me about the ranch. Not just the house, but the whole operation. How it works, what you do all day, what the challenges are. I want to understand it so I can help. You want to learn ranching. I want to be your partner, not just your wife, and I cannot do that if I do not understand what you are doing." He looked stunned, and then pleased, and then something deeper that she could not quite name. "All right. Starting tomorrow, you come with me. I will show you everything." True to his word, he took her with him the next morning, bundling her up in one of his old coats, and a pair of boots that were too big but serviceable. They walked out to the pasture where the surviving cattle were huddled against the wind, and he explained how to judge their condition by the way they stood and moved, how to spot signs of illness or injury, how to calculate how much feed they would need to make it through the rest of the winter. Olivia asked questions constantly, her quick mind grasping the concepts faster than Henry had expected, and by the end of the day she had a much clearer picture of just how dire their situation was. 30 cattle would bring in maybe $1,500 at market, if they were lucky. The banknote was due in September, and it was for $3,000. Even with the money from selling the land, they were going to come up short. "What happens if we cannot pay?" she asked as they walked back to the house. "The bank takes the ranch. We lose everything. Then we need to find another way to make money." "Like what?" She thought about it, turning the problem over in her mind. "What about horses? You said you have 3 good mares in the barn. Could we breed them, sell the foals, maybe? But that takes time and we need money now." "What about breaking horses for other people? You are good with them, I have seen you. People would pay for that." Henry stopped walking and looked at her with something like awe. "That is actually a good idea. There are always ranchers who need horses broken, and most of them do not have the time or skill to do it themselves. I could put the word out, start taking on jobs. And I could take in more sewing and laundry. Between the two of us, we might be able to make up the difference." He grabbed her and kissed her, hard and enthusiastic, and she laughed against his mouth. "You are brilliant," he said. "Absolutely brilliant. I am practical. There is a difference." They put the plan into action immediately. Henry rode into town and let it be known that he was available for horsebreaking. And within a week, he had his first job. A pair of young geldings that needed to be trained for a rancher who had bought them wild off the range. Olivia set up a washboard and tub in the barn and started taking in laundry from the families who lived nearby. And she sewed late into the night, mending shirts and hemming dresses, and making curtains for women who had no time to do it themselves. The work was exhausting, but it was also empowering. They were not just surviving, they were fighting back, taking control of their future instead of waiting passively for disaster to strike. And as the weeks passed and the pile of coins and bills in the tin box under the bed grew slowly larger, Olivia felt a fierce pride in what they were accomplishing together. Henry was changing too. The despair that had haunted him in the early weeks after the blizzard was gone, replaced by a determination that seemed to burn brighter every day. He threw himself into the horse breaking with an intensity that was almost frightening, working with the animals for hours at a time, patient and firm and utterly focused. Olivia would watch him sometimes from the fence, marveling at the way he seemed to speak a language the horses understood, calming them with nothing more than his voice and his presence. One afternoon, she brought him water while he was working with a particularly stubborn mare, and he took the cup from her with a smile that made her stomach flip. He was dirty and sweaty, and his hair was standing up in all directions, and she thought he was the most attractive man she had ever seen. "Thank you," he said, draining the cup in one long swallow. "You are good at this, better than good. I have always liked horses more than cattle. They are smarter, more interesting, but cattle pay the bills, or they did before the winter." He handed back the cup and turned his attention to the mare, who was watching him with wary eyes. "This one is going to be special, though. Look at the way she moves. Look at that intelligence. She's going to make some rancher very happy. Or you could keep her, breed her, and start our own line." He glanced at her, surprised. "You have been thinking about this?" "I have been thinking about a lot of things. We are going to save the ranch, Henry, and once we do, we are going to build it into something even better than it was before." "You really believe that?" "I do you?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled, that bright, joyful smile that still made her heart skip. "With you as my partner, I believe we can do anything." Spring came slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts, and with it came the reality of their financial situation. Henry tallied up their earnings and their expenses, and even with the extra money from the horse breaking and Olivia's sewing, they were still going to be short. Not by much, maybe $500, but it might as well have been $5,000 for all the chance they had of raising it in time. Olivia watched him do the calculations over and over, hoping for a different result, and her heart ached for him. He had worked so hard, they both had, and it still was not enough. "Maybe we could ask the bank for an extension," she suggested. "I already tried. They said no. The winter hit everyone hard and they are calling in their loans. Then we sell something else, more land or the furniture or something. There is nothing left to sell that would bring in that much money." They sat in silence, the weight of failure pressing down on them, and Olivia felt a surge of anger at the unfairness of it all. They had done everything right, had fought and scraped and sacrificed, and it still was not enough. Then she thought of something. "What about my jewelry?" Henry looked up, confused. "What jewelry?" "I have a necklace and a pair of earrings that belong to my grandmother. They are real gold with pearls. My father did not manage to gamble them away before he died because I hid them. They might be worth something." "Olivia, I cannot ask you to sell your grandmother's jewelry." "You are not asking. I am offering." She went to her trunk and dug through it until she found the small velvet pouch at the bottom, the one thing of value she had brought with her from Boston. She opened it and poured the contents into her hand, the necklace and earrings glinting softly in the lamplight. "How much do you think they are worth?" Henry took the necklace and examined it carefully. "I do not know. Maybe $200, maybe more if we can find the right buyer. Then we take them to town and sell them. Between that and what we have saved, it should be enough. Are you sure? These are all you have left of your family." She closed his hand around the necklace, holding it tight. "You are my family now. This ranch is my family. I would rather have a future with you than hold on to the past." He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Olivia, I love you so much. I love you too." She said it easily now, without hesitation, because it was the truest thing she knew. They went to town the next day and found a jeweler who offered them $300 for the necklace and earrings, enough to close the gap and have a little left over. Olivia handed over the jewelry without regret, feeling only relief that they had found a solution. They paid the bank that afternoon, handing over the full amount owed with a satisfaction that bordered on fierce, and walked out of the building as true owners of their ranch, beholden to no one. Henry bought her dinner at the hotel restaurant to celebrate, a luxury they could not really afford but indulged in anyway. They ate steak and potatoes and apple pie, and Henry held her hand across the table and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it. We did. I could not have done it without you. You saved this place, Olivia. You saved me." She squeezed his hand. "We saved each other. That is what partners do." The summer was a time of rebuilding. The cattle fattened on the spring grass, and Henry's horse-breaking business grew as word spread about his skill. Olivia's garden flourished, producing more vegetables than they could eat, and she learned to can and preserve them for the winter. The house began to feel like a true home, filled with small comforts and personal touches that made it theirs, and their relationship deepened in ways that took Olivia's breath away. The awkwardness and uncertainty of the early days was gone, replaced by an easy intimacy that felt as natural as breathing. They talked about everything, shared their fears and hopes and dreams, made plans for the future that grew more elaborate with each passing week. Henry wanted to expand the herd, to build a proper horse barn, to maybe start raising sheep as well as cattle. Olivia wanted to plant fruit trees, to build a school for the children who would eventually live in the valley. To write down the stories, Henry told her about his parents and preserve them for future generations. When Olivia discovered she was pregnant, it felt like the final piece falling into place. They had survived the winter and saved the ranch and fallen deeply in love, and now they were going to have a family. It was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she had dared to dream. And when she told Henry and saw the joy on his face, she knew that every hard moment, every sacrifice, every terrifying uncertainty had been worth it. The months of her pregnancy were some of the happiest of her life. Henry was attentive and tender, constantly fussing over her and making sure she did not overwork herself. He built the cradle and a rocking chair, sanded and polished until they gleamed. He read to her in the evenings from the books on his shelves, everything from Shakespeare to agricultural manuals, his deep voice a comforting rumble in the quiet house. And he talked to the baby, pressing his face against her swelling belly, and telling their child stories about the ranch, and the mountains, and the life they were going to have together. When Wesley was born on that cold January night, with the wind howling around the house and the snow piling up in drifts, just like it had 2 years earlier, Olivia felt as though she had come full circle. The blizzard that had trapped her here had given her everything she had now, and as she held her son and watched Henry cry with joy, she sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the storm and the desperate marriage, and the man who had given her his bed and his ring and his heart. The years that followed were not always easy. There were droughts and market downturns, illness and injury, and the constant grinding work of keeping a ranch running. But there was also love and laughter and the deep satisfaction of building something together, of watching their children grow and their land prosper and their partnership deepen into something unshakable. Penelope was born 2 years after Wesley, arriving in the middle of a thunderstorm with a wail that could probably be heard in town. She was a fierce little thing from the start, demanding and bright and utterly fearless. Henry adored her, carrying her around on his shoulders and letting her help with chores that were far too advanced for a toddler. Olivia watched them together and felt her heart swell with love for this man who was such a devoted father. Pearl came 2 years after Penelope, during a quiet autumn afternoon when the leaves were turning gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and apples. She was the easiest of the three, content to sit and watch the world with her big, serious eyes, and she attached herself to Olivia from the beginning, following her everywhere and wanting to help with everything. The house was chaos with 3 small children, but it was a happy chaos, filled with the sounds of laughter and play and occasional tears. Henry expanded the house, building on 2 more rooms so the children could have their own space and Olivia could have a proper kitchen. They hired a hand to help with the cattle so Henry could spend more time with his family. And slowly, painstakingly, they built the life they had dreamed of during those long winter nights when they had been struggling just to survive. On Wesley's 5th birthday, Henry organized a party with all the neighboring families, and the yard was full of children running and playing while the adults stood around talking and watching. Olivia looked at her home, at her husband laughing with a friend while Wesley climbed on his back, at her daughters playing with the other children, and she felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. "You look happy," said Sarah, one of their neighbors. "I am. More than I ever thought possible. You and Henry are lucky to have each other. Not many marriages have what you two have." Olivia thought about that, about luck and choice and the way life could turn on a single moment. "It was not all luck," she said slowly. "We worked for it. We chose to build something good together. That is the secret, is it not? Choosing every day to keep building even when it is hard." "Yes, I think it is." As the children grew, so did the ranch. Henry bought more land from a neighbor who was retiring and moving to California, and they expanded the herd to 150 head, more than they had started with before the terrible winter. The horse breeding program Olivia had suggested years ago became a significant part of their income. with buyers coming from as far as Wyoming to purchase Henry's well-trained stock. Wesley showed an early interest in the business side of ranching, asking detailed questions about pricing and expenses and profit margins that made both his parents laugh. By the time he was 10, he was keeping his own ledger, tracking the costs of feed and equipment and comparing them to their income. And Henry started bringing him to meetings with buyers and letting him sit in on negotiations. "He is going to be better at this than I ever was," Henry said one night, watching Wesley pore over the account books with a focus that was almost comical in someone so young. "He learned from the best," Olivia said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "You built all of this from almost nothing. Of course he wants to understand how it works. We built it. Never forget that, Olivia. None of this would exist without you." She kissed his cheek. "Then we make a good team, the best." Penelope's love of horses manifested early and strong. She was riding almost before she could walk, fearless and graceful in the saddle in a way that made Henry both proud and terrified. She would disappear for hours, riding out across the range with nothing but a canteen and her own confidence, and come back sunburned and happy with stories about the places she had explored. "You are going to give your father a heart attack," Olivia told her more than once, but Penelope just grinned. "Papa knows I can take care of myself. He taught me." And it was true. Henry had taught all his children to ride and shoot and navigate by the stars, skills that were necessary for anyone living on a ranch in Montana. But Penelope took to it in a way the others did not, with a natural ability that made her seem almost part of the horse she was riding. Pearl was different from her siblings, quieter and more introspective. She spent hours reading the books on Henry's shelves, and when she ran out of those she begged for more. Olivia taught her everything she knew, drilling her on grammar and mathematics and history, and Pearl soaked it up like a sponge. By the time she was 12, she was reading at a level that would have impressed a college student, and Olivia began to suspect that her daughter had inherited her own thwarted dreams of education. "Would you like to be a teacher?" Olivia asked her one day, and Pearl looked up from her book with shining eyes. "Could I? Really? If you work hard and study, yes. You are smart enough, Pearl, smarter than I was at your age. But I would have to leave the ranch. For a while, yes, but you could come back. The valley needs teachers. You could make a real difference here." Pearl thought about it, worrying her lower lip between her teeth. "Would Papa be upset if I left? Your father wants you to be happy, whatever that looks like. We both do." So they made a plan, Olivia and Pearl, working together to prepare for the teaching examination. Pearl studied for hours every day, and Olivia drilled her mercilessly, refusing to accept anything less than perfection. When Pearl passed the exam at 18 and got a position at the Red Cloud School, the whole family celebrated, even though they knew they would miss her terribly. The night before Pearl left, Henry sat her down and gave her a small leather-bound journal. "Your mother used to want to be a teacher," he said. "Before the blizzard brought her here. She gave up that dream to marry me, and I have always felt guilty about that, even though she says she does not regret it. Now you are going to live that dream for her. Make her proud, Pearl." "I will, Papa." "I promise." Olivia hugged her daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, and whispered, "You are braver than I was. Go and be everything I was not brave enough to be." Pearl left the next morning, riding toward Red Cloud with her trunk strapped to a pack horse and her whole future ahead of her. Olivia watched until she disappeared over the horizon and then went inside and cried, overwhelmed by pride and loss, and the strange, bittersweet feeling of watching a child step into the world on their own. Henry found her and held her, understanding without words what she was feeling. They stood together in the quiet house, just the two of them for the first time in years, and Olivia realized that they were entering a new phase of their life. The children were growing up and moving on, and soon it would be just her and Henry again, the way it had been in the beginning. "Are you all right?" he asked, and she nodded against his chest. "Yes, it is just strange. We have spent so many years focused on the children, and now they are becoming their own people. We are not needed in the same way anymore. They will always need us, just differently." He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes warm. "And we have each other. That has not changed. No, that has not changed." They rediscovered each other in the months that followed, taking long rides together across the ranch land, staying up late talking the way they had when they were first married, making love with the unhurried pleasure of people who knew each other's bodies intimately. Olivia felt like she was falling in love with Henry all over again, seeing him not just as a husband and father but as a man, complex and thoughtful, and still capable of surprising her after all these years. When Wesley announced his engagement to a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet-faced young woman named Catherine who clearly adored him, Olivia felt another shift in her world. Her son was going to be married, was going to start his own family, and she was going to be a grandmother. It seemed impossible that so much time had passed, that the baby she had held in her arms on that snowy night was now a man preparing to become a husband. The wedding was held at the ranch in the summer, with half the county in attendance. Wesley and Catherine stood under an arch that Henry had built from willow branches, and they spoke their vows with shining eyes and voices that shook with emotion. Olivia cried through the whole ceremony, and Henry held her hand and cried with her, both of them overwhelmed by the passage of time and the beauty of watching their son begin his own journey. At the reception, Henry pulled Olivia onto the makeshift dance floor and waltzed her around while someone played a fiddle and the guests clapped and laughed. "Remember our wedding?" he asked, and she smiled. "We did not dance. I know. There was no music and no guests, and we were both terrified. But I wish we had. I wish I had held you like this and told you that everything was going to be all right. You did tell me that, just not while dancing. True." He spun her and she laughed, dizzy and happy. "I love you, Olivia Everett. Have I mentioned that lately? Not in the last hour." I was starting to worry. He kissed her in front of everyone, a long, slow kiss that made the guests whistle and cheer, and when they broke apart they were both grinning like fools. The years continued to roll forward, each one bringing new changes and challenges. Wesley and Catherine had their first child, a boy they named Henry after his grandfather, and Olivia held her grandson and marveled at the way life continued, generation after generation. Penelope married her rancher's son in a ceremony almost as large as Wesley's, and Pearl wrote letters from Red Cloud full of stories about her students and the satisfaction of teaching. Henry and Olivia grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work. But they were still as connected as they had been in those early days, still reaching for each other in the night, still finding joy in the simple fact of being together. They built the smaller house when Wesley took over the ranch, not because they were being pushed out, but because they wanted to give their son and his growing family space to make the place their own. The little house was perfect for them, cozy and warm with a big porch where they could sit and watch the sun set over the mountains. Henry tended a garden and Olivia wrote letters to their children and grandchildren, and they lived quietly and contentedly, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Wesley organized a party at the big house, with all the children and grandchildren and neighbors gathered to celebrate. There were speeches and toasts, and a cake that Catherine had made with 40 candles blazing on top. Henry and Olivia stood together and looked out at the crowd of people who loved them, and Olivia felt tears streaming down her face. "Why are you crying?" Henry asked, wiping at her cheeks with his thumb. "Because I am happy. Because all of this, everything we have, came from one terrible storm and one desperate proposal. Because I could have said no and my whole life would have been different, and not in a good way. I could have let you ride on to Red Cloud and never seen you again. Why did you not?" He thought about it, his brow furrowing. "Because from the moment you walked into my house, cold and exhausted and trying so hard to be brave, I knew you were someone special, someone I wanted to know better. And then, when I realized what being snowed in with me would do to your reputation, I could not just let you go and face that alone. So I offered you the only solution I could think of. The ring. The ring." He took her hand and looked down at it, at the garnet that had worn smooth over 4 decades of being loved. "My mother would have liked you. She would have said I was the luckiest man alive to have convinced you to marry me. I was lucky too. I did not realize it at the time, but I was." They danced that night, slowly and carefully, mindful of their old bones and creaky joints. But they moved together as perfectly as they always had. Two people who had learned each other so thoroughly that they no longer needed words to communicate. Around them, their family laughed and celebrated, and the ranch that they had saved and built and nurtured spread out under the endless Montana sky, a testament to love and stubbornness, and the refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. When Henry died in his sleep at 72, Olivia felt as though the world had lost its color. She sat with his body for hours, holding his hand and talking to him, telling him all the things she wished she had said more often. That he was the best thing that had ever happened to her. That every day with him had been a gift. That she would love him until the day she died and beyond. The funeral was held on a hilltop overlooking the ranch, and it seemed like half of Montana showed up to pay their respects. Henry had been beloved, not just by his family but by everyone who had known him, and the stories people told about his kindness and his generosity and his quiet strength made Olivia cry all over again. Wesley gave the eulogy, standing straight and tall even though his face was wet with tears. "My father taught me that success is not measured in dollars or acres," he said. "It is measured in the people you love and the legacy you leave behind. He loved my mother more than anything in the world, and he left behind a ranch that will support his family for generations. He was a good man, the best man I have ever known, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be half as good as he was." They buried him on the hilltop, under a sky so blue and clear it hurt to look at. Olivia stood by the grave long after everyone else had gone, talking to Henry the way she used to talk to him on the porch in the evenings. "I am not ready to say goodbye," she told him. "I do not think I will ever be ready. But I will try to live the way you would want me to live, with joy and courage and love, and when it is my time, I will find you again. I promise." She lived 8 more years, filling her days with her children and grandchildren, and the ranch that was still thriving under Wesley's careful stewardship. She wrote down the story of how she and Henry had met and married, preserving it for future generations, and she sat on her porch every evening and looked out at the land they had saved together and felt grateful for every single moment. When she died at 80, peacefully in her sleep, she was buried next to Henry on the hilltop, exactly where she belonged. The family gathered again, older now but still strong, and they told stories about Olivia and Henry and the love that had sustained them through everything. Pearl read from the journal Olivia had kept, the story of the blizzard and the proposal and the ring, and there was not a dry eye among them. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own mark but never forgetting the foundation that Henry and Olivia had laid. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold until it took on a mythic quality. A reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the very best outcomes if we are brave enough to take the chances offered to us. And on winter nights, when the wind howled down from the mountains and the snow fell thick and fast, the descendants of Henry and Olivia would gather in the big house and tell the story of the blizzard that trapped a teacher at a rancher's hayloft, and how he gave her his bed and his wedding ring and his heart, and how she gave him hers in return, and how together they built something that would last forever.